Welcome everyone to another AJU Open webinar. My name is Alyssa Silva, and I'm very excited to be with you all today to talk about a very important topic, anti-Semitism on campus, but more specifically, where should a Jew go to college? I know there are many factors, and of course with the recent anti-Semitic spikes after October 7th, that is an increased reason, but there are oftentimes other reasons why a Jewish student should go to this college or that college, etc. So we're going to explore many topics tonight. Now, I'd like to introduce to you our fellow panelists. We have Rabbi Ari Israel, Executive Director of Maryland Hillel, going into his 28th year, if you can believe it. We have Sabrina Goldfischer, who is a recent alum of Harvard, and she wrote her thesis on anti-Semitism at Harvard. And last but certainly not least, our very own Rabbi Pinchas Giller of AJU, a Ziegler Rabbinical School teacher and one of my favorite Kabbalists. I don't know if he would call himself that, but I think he is my favorite Kabbalist. The Campus Anti-Semitism ADL report came out today. And that has been quite a topic on at least my news feeds. I don't know about yours, but I went ahead and kind of collated each of our, either the school we're associated with or the school that we graduated from. So first, Ari at Maryland Hillel, you rated a B on the ADL's report card. Pinchas, you're a graduate of Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, and they received a D on the ADL report card. And Sabrina, Harvard, received an F on the report card, which I'm sure you're not surprised about. And then I went to the University of Arizona and we received a B, which I'm actually surprised, but I'm happy about it. So with that in mind, I would love to turn it over to the panelists. Sabrina, if you could start us off, share a little bit about what Hillels and college campuses were promoting before October 7th and how Jewish Life Now, Israel advocacy, and other things that parents should be looking at schools have changed since October 7th.
Sure, yeah. So I was in school and wrote my thesis before October 7th, well before October 7th. And some people, when I was noticing the responses to the horrific terrorist attacks of 10/7 and then the ensuing conflict on college campuses, a lot of people were surprised. And I wish I could say I was surprised, but this is exactly the type of thing that would come after such a horrible disaster. I think that pre-10/7, the climate was bad on a lot of college campuses, and I have data showing that, at least at Harvard. And then the ADL's data is, of course, extremely helpful that just came out. But I think that there was spikes. There were moments where things would get bad, then there was moments when things would get better. For example, there's a study showing that after the conflict in Gaza in 2021, incidents targeting Jewish students increased, and then they doubled during the 2021 to 2022 academic year's first 10 months. So there were spikes, but I think that post 10/7 is taking us to a whole new unfortunate level where the climate's just consistently more disturbing.
Thank you. Ari, how about you?
So I think it's a great question. First of all, thank you for having us. I'm excited to reconnect with you, Alyssa. It's been a few years, and I'm supercharged by what you're doing over there, and my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation tonight. I do think there's a major seismic shift between pre and post October 7th, and our students have been resilient, are resilient, and I'm admired every day by what they accomplish. As Sabrina said, anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years. October 7th was not the first time it just manifested itself, and unfortunately, October 7th was a watershed moment for our people. The massacre, the challenges of, being a Jew, not only in Israel, but recognizing that anti-Semitism is here, prevalent for all of us. I think it was a wake-up moment for so many that we've been growing up. I'm in my 50s. We've been growing up for a pretty peaceful time post the Holocaust. And here we are. Our neighbors, our friends, our classmates, professors who we thought were allies are saying things which are full with lies and hate and distraught language. So there is that moment. a strong Hillel and a strong Jewish community prior to October 7th. I think post-October 7th is going to be building off of that. So we didn't start our Israel platform pre-October 7th. Maryland Hillel has been honored to be one of the leading schools in the country on Birthright Israel. Literally 2 summers ago, we took over 400 students in 1 summer. Last year, due to cuts in Birthright, we took about half that number. And this upcoming summer, we're only taking a bus, and we're still leading the country in terms of that. So there is resilience, there's shrinkage, but our students are very strong. And I'm very proud of our students who continue to work day in and day out. We are currently battling a BDS bill on campus, a divestment bill, and our students are spending all the time, are up on a regular basis. And I'm grateful really for their leadership and our partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ari. And the same question to you, Pinchas, and specifically, right, when you were in college, when you're active in Jewish life at Columbia, what was being promoted, and is it similar to what's happening now and what's being promoted post-October 7th versus pre-October 7th?
Well, it was a different age. I spent the first 3 years of my time at Columbia an avid member of Students for a Democratic Society, which was a radical group of the time. It was a gritty urban campus with a strong sort of working class aesthetic. You didn't go to Columbia to be Oscar Wilde. There was an active Jewish Defense League on campus, and there was the brawling between Students for Democratic Society and the Jewish Defense League. So it was really rather different. I mean, I told you that I took issue with one of the statements that was made in the promotion of this. Where should one send one's child to college? Well, your child is not a child. They have agency. They're going to go to college where they want to and where they feel is attractive to them. And the only thing you can maybe control is how much money you're willing to put into it. So I mean, all colleges have challenges right now, and life, in fact, has challenges right now for Jewish people. So, I mean, the climate for me 45 years ago is really not really relevant. It was a different kind of college education in those days.
Yeah. Absolutely. And kind of following off of that, Pinchas, my next question for all of you is, what are some key indicators or warning signs for Jewish students and their families to consider when evaluating the atmosphere of a college campus regarding anti-Semitism? And Pinchas, as you mentioned, right, it's not the parent who's choosing at the end of the day, or it shouldn't be. It's the student. And so what is some key indicators that these Jewish students can be aware of?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to be very, very brief when I do it. We have a problem with the nature of knowledge. There's only, when people came to the humanities in most of the 20th century, you needed a doctorate to be a professor in a college. After a while in the humanities, they began to run out of things to say about English literature, about Tristram Shandy or Robinson Crusoe. So new methodologies began to be developed in the 1980s, such as deconstruction, Jacques Derrida's famous deconstruction of Edgar Allan Poe's Purloined Letter, etc. Foucault's notion that gender was a choice was an intellectual idea in the 1980s. In the 1990s and in the aughts, people began to put it into practice. And so we have this sort of falling away of the bottom of study in the humanities. The more the prestigious universities hired the more sort of like nihilistic professors in the humanities, and their influence rose to a peak. So you really have to check the intellectual climate of the university that you're going to. Public universities embraced this, where they had large minority populations who were, found that they profited by notions such as intersectionality and that kind of thing. So our whole way of dealing with knowledge in the humanities has sort of fallen away. My teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, said, with regards to a lot of intellectual ideas, some people think they don't need it, and some people think they have it. All right. So in this case, there are schools of thought in the university, and I think you have to look at a very high level and see who's teaching and what the intellectual and social climate is.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Ari, same question to you. What are some key indicators or warning signs for Jewish students and their families to consider when looking for a college?
I'm going to take a little privilege with your question, Alyssa, and I'm not always convinced there are warning signs. I'm going to make a statement that any university you felt you could go to, wanted to go to before 10/7, I actually think you should still go to post 10/7. This is a point in time, and universities are grappling with this. Some universities are doing better than others. I do think you need to speak to the students who are there, and almost all of the students that I've spoken to in my synagogue on Thanksgiving weekend, just a month or so into the war, we hosted a panel and I was on it. We had a few hundred people in the audience and about 25, 30 students from 20 plus universities across the country, across the spectrum. And I asked the students to raise their hands if anyone feels that students, high school students, should or should not go to your university. And there wasn't one student who said that you should not go. And these were Ivies, these were privates, these were publics across the country. And I don't think we should run away from universities. And I do think we will see changes in the future for the better. And we have to be part of that conversation. And I'm hopeful for that.
Thank you so much. And Sabrina, same question to you, but I guess a little bit of a twist, right? You weren't a student so long ago, and you weren't, seems like just yesterday maybe that you were touring your own college campus. You go to Harvard, you tour it. It all sounds dandy to you, great Ivy League. And then you get there and you write a thesis on anti-Semitism at Harvard, right? So were there warning signs, or did you ignore some warning signs? I would love to hear you kind of expand on that piece.
Even when I was applying to colleges 5 years ago now, still it was very different from how it is today. But I want to second that point that was just made. I think it's crucial we don't take ourselves out of universities. We don't take ourselves out of spaces that might seem challenging to us, even when those challenges feel extremely insurmountable. The moment we start taking ourselves out of those places is the moment our voices will be entirely ignored. But I could talk about some warning signs, whether it's what the presidents of universities have said, what different metrics look like on campuses related to Jewish population. The ADL did such a good job in laying out a lot of those metrics. So I think that if that's something that's important to you in your college search, that's something that you should absolutely take into consideration. But I think that the most important thing to look at when you're looking at your college campus or potential college campus is what is the Jewish community like? Because if there are challenges on your campus, that's likely where your heart, your mind, your attention, your friends will be centered. And my Hillel experience was wonderful. It was incredible. I also had an amazing experience with the Chabad on campus. Those were the centers of our Jewish life. And understanding how the Jewish community comes together, who comprises the Jewish community. I really wanted to find a Jewish community where I was challenged by my peers. I got to learn from Jews who practiced really differently from myself. So it doesn't mean you have to look for a Jewish community where everyone looks and thinks exactly like you do. But also you want to make sure that the Jewish community is a place where you can have challenging conversations, but you don't feel excluded or isolated, or it's just completely out of the realm of a place that you would feel comfortable. So I think the most important warning sign isn't actually a warning at all. It's something really exciting. It's look at your Jewish community, look at your potential Jewish community and see what it looks like, because that is where you're going to turn to in the best of times for holidays and exciting moments, but also in the worst of times like post 10/7.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can definitely corroborate that story. Hillel at the University of Arizona definitely was my home. But you touched on the diversity, right, of Judaism, of the Hillel, of the Chabad, of Jewish life on campus. And my very first job out of college was at the University of Maryland Hillel. And that absolutely, and I've worked at another Hillel since then, but that absolutely was one of the most diverse Jewish campuses that I had ever seen, and I didn't even know it existed until I got there. So a question specifically for you, Ari. 19% of undergrads, right, at the University of Maryland are Jewish. That's about 6,000. Obviously, we can, argue the numbers. It's about 6,000 students. With your extensive experience at the University of Maryland Hillel, what protective measures have you found effective in creating a supportive and secure environment for Jewish students, both amidst rising anti-Semitism, but perhaps other issues that students face today in college?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do remember when you first came to work with us, and it's an honor and a pleasure to continue to see you grow and develop, and it's amazing work that you've done, Alyssa. I think your question is poignant. We did not develop a relationship with our universities in and on October 7th. It wasn't I had to find the president's phone number. I had it before, because when we asked the president to show up on October 9th for our vigil on the first day back of classes, which attracted 1,200 students, and the president did show up, that's because the president also showed up in September during the first week of class at our opening barbecue that had well over 1,000 students, and the president knew our address, knew what we were all about, and knew to be there at a time of need. And he's representative of, and he's leading all students on campus, and Jewish population is an important piece, and they recognize that, and we are in relationship on a regular basis. We are there in times of challenge, and also there in times of love, and in times of hope and celebration. And it doesn't happen once, it happens on a continual basis. And through that, we also need to speak truth to power sometimes. We didn't like the opening statement of the president, and then after that opening statement came out, many statements around the country were weak. We didn't know what was happening. The news wasn't out. President Biden then came out, if you remember, on Tuesday, I think it was October 10th, and then through relationships, we got a very strong statement from our president and leadership. So it doesn't happen just at a crisis. It happens long before that. And finally, I really think it's important to know when to call, who to call, and why you're calling. We can't always raise the volume. We can't always raise the level of intensity and say, hey, we need this. This is a crisis. This is on fire. We've been in crisis together. We've been in crisis before October 7th. We're certainly in a crisis moment post-October 7th. But we can't always cry wolf. We can't be that boy or girl who is constantly saying, hey, I need help, I need attention. We do need it, but we need it in the context of a greater university and realize we are a part of a larger sum. So we can't cry, and we have to understand who, when, and why to call.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Pinchas, I want to turn it to you now. If you have any comments on that, as someone who now works at a university, at a rabbinical school, as part of AJU, could you touch on the importance of the Jewish community or Jewish institutions on campuses being a part of larger life at a college, perhaps?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Ari about something. Yeah, that it seemed to me that Maryland very adroitly was constructed over the course of your tenure there as a destination for Jewish students. That 30 years ago, it was a state university on the northeastern corridor, and then it became a place through a combination of actions that were taken consciously that became a destination for Jewish students all over the Northeast, and particularly Orthodox students. In the 80s and 90s, it had been the University of Pennsylvania, and that got sort of fully booked up. And then, Maryland became a place. So it is possible with the cooperation of various elements to create a not a safe school, but a desirable school out of a pre-existent university. Is my impression correct?
Yeah, no, I do agree with that, and I think that's an important statement. I think we are a safe school, and I think many schools around the country are safe, and I don't think they're all in crisis at all times. So we got to delve into what's happening, and Maryland has become a great story. We're proud of our traditional population, and we also have a vibrant reform and conservative population, and we are a community of communities with so much diversity and so much opportunity for students to embrace their Judaism, and the university is super supportive of them.
Pinchas, did you want to expand a little bit on those relationships just from your perspective as an educator?
Well, I just know that there's different kinds of professors and they take different kinds of roles. Some professors can be quite bedeviling. They can take themselves to the hills, not be supportive of the Jewish community inside the university, not be involved in the Jewish community outside of the university. And some professors can be really exemplary in their support of students and the community everywhere. I mean, my teacher, Robert Alter, the great translator of the Bible and literary critic, was a stalwart member of the Berkeley Jewish community through many social storms that occurred there during the 1980s. And other professors can basically be that way, or they can be very frustrating as negative role models.
For sure. And just since you touched on the roles of professors, do you believe that the political opinions of professors fuel the fires of whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or, you name it? Or is it mostly social media? And Pinchas, I'd love for you to kind of expand on that. And then Sabrina, if you want to touch on that as well, feel free.
Well, I've had many colleagues in academia who are rather impractical people with regards to the consequences of their words, statements, and actions, and are often rather effete in the choices that they make of what to advocate and what to think of as saying things that are really not very constructive to the general community in order to carve out the exact sort of aesthetically perfect position between various points of view, post-Zionist and non-Zionist points of view, and also people who are frankly more concerned with currying favor in various progressive circles than in I wouldn't say being protective, but upholding the social needs of their students and other elements of the community.
Fantastic. Sabrina?
Yeah, just to add on, now that the professor part has sort of been spoken about on the social media component, so I loved my Harvard experience, and despite its challenges, it was really wonderful. And of course, as I've shared, I loved my Hillel experience. So post 10/7, I was actually asked to come back and work as the anti-Semitism response coordinator for Harvard Hillel. So I helped students when an incident would happen to them, process that incident, and then pursue formal reporting if that was something that they wanted to do, and make sure those channels were available to them. So it was a lot post 10/7. It was one of the most difficult jobs that I've ever had. But what was maybe the most striking to me was just the degree of toxicity that existed on social media, whether it was students' personal platforms that they were posting rhetoric on, or on anonymous chat platforms. Like at Harvard, we have this program called Side Chat that a lot of universities have, and especially when that anonymous front is put up, where suddenly you can say whatever you want, even more than just behind a screen. The type of rhetoric that is normalized and spread and made to seem completely fine when it really exists just on the craziest margins of what we should be thinking about in our society for serious issues. So I think that the social media component, the professors are obviously important, but from my personal experiences working at Harvard Hillel, the social media impacted students on the day-to-day basis, 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. The inability to get away, right, is constantly in your face. I mean, it brings a whole new level to how you experience not only traumas as a student and growing in your life, but to world events. I mean, if you can't escape it and find like a quiet, safe place, then truly it's inundating and it feels very suffocating. To continue, Sabrina, I just wanted to note you were quoted in a piece that was sent to the senior fellow at Harvard, Miss Pritzker, and the interim president, Dr. Garber, and they quoted you with some percentages. So they were trying to be very specific with this letter, and they quoted you saying that you had found 62.5% of Harvard students that you interviewed had experienced anti-Semitism at Harvard or knew people who had, and 68.75% of them had censored themselves in academic and social settings because of their Judaism or ties to Israel. Now, do you feel like this is unique to Harvard, or do you feel like this may be a common experience across the board post October 7th?
Yeah, so in terms of that research specifically that I did for my thesis, to be clear on my methodology, I interviewed 60 students from various different perspectives of Jewishness and Israel politics within the broader Jewish community. So not just within sort of the closer knit Hillel circles, but looking as big as I possibly could. I was president of Harvard Hillel, so I was in a position where I could sort of think big and look at as many students as I possibly could. And then I coded for themes based on what students had discussed with me in their interviews. I was very grateful that they were so honest and open with me. And it was a privilege to get to learn their stories. And then that's how I developed my percentages. So I think that the more interesting part of my thesis is the student stories, but yes, I did come up with these metrics that were cited in that congressional letter. I can't speak to all universities because I studied Harvard, which is a weird and unique place in some ways, but I think that I did a little bit of research on some other nearby Massachusetts universities, but not enough to really give any sort of meaningful data on that. But I think it's very much applicable to thinking about academia more largely, and also other universities, public, private, Ivy, not whatever. And I think that when we think about broader societal trends, I think that campuses very much are a microcosm of what's happening in the world, only in a much more concentrated way, given that it's young people and these very real world topics are what we live and breathe every day. We don't have jobs that we have to go to, but there's a lot of factors that I think potentially make Harvard unique, or within the Ivy League unique, with sort of the decreasing Jewish populations, which various other people have spoken about. I think that there's a general de-Judification, I like to call it, of Harvard in certain ways. I'm doing some research right now, which will hopefully be coming out in a publication soon, about sort of the decreases in mentions of Judaism, mentions of substantive Jewish content in our course offerings. And who designs the course offering but faculty, and then the numbers of faculty who are Jewish on the decline. So I think that in terms of what makes Harvard maybe unique, maybe some of those factors are unique, but then there's a lot of things that just impacts all students, whether there's factors like this generation is just maybe generally less connected to Israel because we're further away from our ancestors who experienced that persecution. I think that there's a general academic, my thesis was called The Death of Discourse. I think there's an epidemic of the death of discourse. COVID, the Trump years, so many things impacted so many students. So I don't think that Harvard's unique in any sense.
Definitely. Ari, did you want to touch on that a little bit from your perspective at Maryland? Does that percentage strike you? Do you feel like Maryland is anywhere close to that number?
I think that's a great question. I don't have the data. Sabrina, it sounds to me, your research is not only impeccable but important. We do research. We do poll our students. We're actually part of a campus climate initiative through Hillel International and our university administration, which is now at this point in time actually polling and doing focus groups with our students. So we're all excited about that. And I'm not sure. I do think that certainly post October 7th, overwhelming majority, and I'm not going to give you an exact number, of students have definitely experienced an anti-Semitic incident. The degree of that and what that looks like, I certainly don't want to comment, and I'm not, privy to all the situations that happened, but there's definitely been an increase and an uptick.
Thank you so much. Pinchas, did you have anything to comment or expand on?
Well, I have an unpopular opinion. It's entirely possible in terms of the decline of Jewish students at elite universities, which is really quite relative because there are still an awful lot relative to our population. It's possible that the lean and hungry and ambitious generation of the Ellis Island generation at the turn of the 20th century that so expanded and fought in World War II, and the children populated the Ivy League universities, and their parents had fought their way in. That may be cresting. The Jewish community may be complacent in certain ways, and we may not be producing the same degree of competitive high achievers among our students. Moreover, we have new populations. We have Bukhari Jews in Queens, and Moroccan Jews in Quebec, and Syrians up and down the northeastern corridor, and Persians in LA and Southern California, and Russians and expatriate Israelis everywhere. And they are the question of whether they're being counted or represented is very open. We think of a certain kind of haut bourgeois post-war Ellis Island Ashkenazi as our theoretical Jewish student, but there are many, many other populations that we don't even know. We don't know if they're represented, and we don't know if we're counting them, and we don't even really know in every locale that I mentioned how many there are. So the face of the Jewish community is changing faster than the infrastructure and the superstructure can really keep track of it.
Rabbi Ari, I wanted to ask you now, moving a little bit away from the anti-Semitism piece, beyond academic programs, right? What extracurricular or community engagement opportunities like Greek life, intramurals, etc., have you found to be beneficial in fostering a strong Jewish identity among college students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it goes back to your first question about what was life like before October 7th. Before October 7th, post October 7th, not much of a difference on a daily basis for our students. Those involved in Greek life are still in Greek life, and those involved in intramurals are still playing sports. Shabbat happens, Minyan happens, our tzedek, our social justice is happening. Sadly, our birthright numbers are down. Unfortunately, that's a reality for what's happening. But it is so important to probe, and the question you asked before about what should students look for when they come to college campuses. Can I be like that person? Am I interested in Greek life? Do I see myself in Greek life? Is there mostly a Jewish fraternity or sorority? Is there an integrated fraternity and Jewish sorority? And from our perspective, Maryland, we have both. We have, the traditional Jewish fraternities and sororities, the APIs, the APHIs, the SDTs, and the TEPs. And then we also have Tri-Delt and Kappa Delta, which also have significant Jewish populations, just a little different flavor, and you should know that. The reason why students join these groups is because they are looking for connections. The beauty of Maryland Hillel and the beauty of the University of Maryland is its large size and its school spirit. The challenge of a University of Maryland type school is its size. So how do we make it small, and how do we make it intimate? And that's what these groups and these opportunities are all about, and why Hillel has 30 student groups. We are a community of communities that are resilient and are building on each other. And the math that we use, Sabrina, this might not work in your senior thesis, but the math that we use in Maryland is 1 + 1 = 3. And that ideology that each of us is unique, and we bring something, and with someone, we are much stronger together, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Thank you. A question from the audience. It's a general question, so anyone can answer, so chime on in. Where did it go? There it is. Okay. So there were so many resources, right, devoted. You mentioned Birthright a few times, Ari. So many resources devoted financially, staffing, educationally, etc., to build a relationship with Jews and Israel. But then more recently, there was quite a bit of funding to create relationships between non-Jewish student leaders and Israel, taking them on free trips to Israel every so often. And then also, of course, campus climate initiative, right, focusing on the educators and the staff members at schools. And the question is that we've received in the chat, what happened? Was the money, did it work? Did it not work? Are we seeing the fruits of that labor? Like I said, any of you feel free to chime in, but where are we now?
There's one program that I think is absolutely amazing at Harvard Hillel. It's called Israel Trek, and it's put on by Israeli students, and it's intended for non-Jewish students who have little to no affiliations. And the goal is to get students into Israel, to be able to see the complexities for themselves. It's not a propaganda or brainwashing trip, as many on our campus like to say it is, but it's an amazing experience for students to actually go and see for themselves. And it's put on by Israeli students who know the place and know the people and provide a really diverse look at what life looks like in Israel and what the conflict looks like, and gives students the opportunity for free thinking, which is ultimately the goal of all this. So I would say that even though the campus is obviously in crisis at Harvard in some capacities, think of where we could be if we didn't have students who were going on these types of trips. Think of where we could be if we weren't trying to build these bridges. I think that it would be silly for us to ignore the efforts that we have made, because we don't know how bad it could get. It's bad. We got an F rating from the ADL, but it could be worse. And so I think that we have to be grateful and proud of our students who are trying to build those bridges, because oftentimes they are student initiated.
Pinchas, did you want to touch on that?
What I was thinking of wasn't directly related to Hasbara or Israel education in the student level, but in past decades, APAC was a much broader umbrella and much more nonpartisan, and they began taking congressional aides and student leaders and all kinds of non-Jews under their banner to Israel, and really enculturating people into thinking, seeing them as a more benign force. Recently, they've become a much more partisan PAC with some dubious appropriations in terms of their support and that kind of thing. But the really important thing is to be reaching out and creating situations which, under the guise of a free trip, are really enculturating and educating people from but before they even really have any influence, when they're just people who are showing great potential for future leadership. So I do think that has to be done much more unabashedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ari, how about for yourself? I know it was more recent that the Campus Climate Coalition was brought at UMD. So how has that helped? Or
yeah, we're in I mentioned before, the Campus Climate Initiative. We're in our first cohort. We are working closely with university administrators and individuals in the Office of Diversity, in the Dean's Office, and they're great allies. They're working hard on our behalf, but also collectively on the university behalf, on the university's whole, to stamp out bias and to make sure that all students are safe, which is one of our values as well. I'm going to twist the question a little bit, and I appreciate the audience asking that question. And what makes noise is the tragedy and the crisis. What's not making noise is all the opportunities and all the allies that we actually have on campus. So at Maryland, there are a few hundred students who are definitely detractors, anti-Israel, that are definitely not part of our solution. And there are 30,000, plus undergraduate students at University of Maryland. Several thousand pro-Israel students, several hundred anti-Israel, and then there's allies on both sides. Our opportunity is to figure out, what do we do with all the students that can't find Israel on the map? And how do we engage them? And we took students to Israel the last several years. We've been blessed to do that. Unfortunately, not this past January. We took non-Jewish students, student government, and they are amazing. They really are. There isn't a black and white. There's just a lot of nuance that I think is a word that we as a Jewish community need to grapple with and need to embrace. It's not a faucet on and a faucet off. It's not you're a Jew hater or a Jew lover. Individuals are grappling with what the complexity of life is all about within the Jewish community as well. And therefore, we really need to grapple with what our allies are saying or not saying. Finally, I'll just mention, I mentioned earlier that we are dealing with an anti-Israel bill in the student government. Most of the student legislators are not Jewish. And how do we work with them to understand what the complexity is all about, and to understand this is not just bad for Israel, but it's bad for America, and that ideology is something we need to work on. And I do think those trips work. They're not perfect, and we need more nuance.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the optimism there. We need more of that, especially when we're looking at our college campuses. We only have a few more minutes. I think we'll go over 5:45 a little bit, because I think that's okay, as long as everyone is okay with it over here on our panel. Another question from the audience, specifically for Sabrina. Okay, my daughter founded and runs the Jewish Student Association at her public high school. When applying to colleges this fall, what should she highlight or hide? Let me reread that. Should she highlight or downplay or hide this accomplishment?
Absolutely not. Firstly, that is such an incredible achievement of your daughter. So kudos for her for taking on that type of project, especially as a high schooler. I think that one of the most important things that we can be doing as Jews and as people who care about this issue is making sure that our high schoolers are ready and equipped to be able to take on really difficult dialogues in high school or in college. I used to work for a program with the American Jewish Committee, where I helped design curriculum for their high school education program. And I think that was essential for making sure that we had students who were ready to go out there and have the facts and know what they were talking about. But in terms of how your daughter should or should not be speaking about that, she should say what's true to her. And she should say what motivates her and makes her unique and special. And it sounds like this is probably it, because it takes so much heart and dedication to create something like this. So don't be afraid, go for it. And colleges will see that she is caring about her community and caring about the issues that it's taking on. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Obviously, I'm not an admissions officer, but I think what colleges want to see is what's true to you.
I fully agree. I really do. Sabrina, great point. Be true to you. Don't hide. Let's be proud of what you've accomplished, and all the kudos to you for your hard work, and that should be recognized.
I'll go ahead with our wrap-up question. I can't believe it's already been 45 minutes. Like I said earlier, we could talk about this for 3 hours. There's so much more to be said. But to wrap it up, just a little anecdote from each of you. Ari, we'll start with you. We'll go to Pinchas and Sabrina, if you could round us out. Looking ahead, what changes or developments do you foresee in the landscape of anti-Semitism on college campuses? And how can individuals and institutions prepare to address these challenges effectively?
Yeah, no, I wish I could predict the future. I can't even pick the lottery numbers, so I'm not sure I can predict what's going to happen. None of us were anticipating October 7th, and yet, unfortunately, anti-Semitism, preceded it. And I can predict, and not even predict, but tell you it will still be around. So we need to build resilience. I do think we're seeing a yin and a yang. There's always the reaction of universities that need to react and do react, and I think are sometimes slow learners. And hopefully we as individuals in partnership can both speak truth to power, but also recognize that we want to do it with embracing and recognizing we are in this together and not running away, but being part of the solution. Last thing is nuance. I think nuance is critical. I mentioned before, it's, universities start with the word UN, which perhaps is not our greatest ally in New York, but the UN concept, I think, is important for us to look at. And from my perspective, there is being uncomfortable, there's being unwelcome, and there's unsafe. So being uncomfortable is part of growing up. I'm not asking for it, but sometimes you just got to face it when we're dealing with new people, post and pre-October 7th. Being unwelcome, something we got to work on. And when there's someone unsafe, we have to be there, and we have to make sure the university is being vigilant and responsible and responsive. So I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can tell you that the Jewish community continues to be strong, and Am Yisrael Chai.
After October 7th, a number of my friends from the small town in Central Florida where I was brought up, non-Jews, contacted me and inquired after my welfare, and then a few weeks later they contacted me again. I was their votive Jew, in the only Jew that they knew, and they projected all of their concern onto me. So I think that one has to guard one's friendships and relationships from the place that you come from, especially if it's outlying, because that is the best kind of identification that you have. So I think that those relationships don't go away, and people should hold on to them.
Yeah, those are two great answers. I think that things will get better. I'm hopeful that just sort of looking at the calendar with summer coming up, universities will have a minute to breathe, collect themselves, and not have to deal with these crises as they're unfolding. They'll have a minute to stop and think a little bit more carefully about their further actions. I also am optimistic. I think that from my work at Harvard Hillel, I worked for Harvard Hillel, not for the university, but a lot of my job was working with university administrators and communicating to them what was happening and making sure that they were understanding the unique needs of Jewish students and how to support them better within infrastructures of their universities. So I think that we need to remember that I think generally we're all looking to create a similar thing, which is a university where people can freely express their ideas and feel safe to do so. Well, I can't predict the future of universities. I can tell you what I think that they should do. And I think that universities first need to start by objectively assessing their problems and understanding what is going on, because without this, we don't know what to do. We need to increase institutional transparency. We need to understand what's happening behind university closed doors and be able to see in and help, and not make it be just the room of insiders, but bring in people who really know what's happening in many different ways. We need to make sure that universities are abiding by their codes of conduct and by federal, state, and local law. And we also need to regain an atmosphere where we can have civility in the short term and in the long term. I think that long term, it will take a lot. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. But with everyone that I've worked with, whether it's students or administrators or faculty, I am extremely hopeful, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Alyssa, if I could just jump in for one more second and build off of what Sabrina just said. I do agree wholeheartedly we need to grapple with and hold our universities accountable. And I do think we also need to flip the switch and have a different conversation with our high schoolers and parents and alumni. There are deep challenges. I'm not whitewashing any of them. They're not going away, and we need to be vigilant. And when I started my career 28 years ago, one of my mentors said, one of the great Jewish philosophers, Woody Allen, commented that what's the definition of Jewish swimming? It's come in the pool and don't drown with me. Perhaps that's not the message that's going to resonate with our younger students. Don't drown with me. That the problem is anti-Semitism. The problem isn't anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a problem. It's not our problem. It's not our responsibility to fix it. We need to be in partnership, but we also have to understand what Judaism is all about. We have to be strong. We have to get in that pool together, do the breaststroke, do the butterfly. Let's swim and be joyous. And instead of focusing on the noise that exists, and we can't tune it out, let's just simply make a lot more Jewish music.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. If there are no more comments, if there's any last remarks that anyone wants to make, please do so. But with that, I thank you all so much for being here. Sabrina, Ari, Pinchas, thank you for being part of the conversation and coming to the table, sharing your insights with our community. And as you all very well said, Am Yisrael Chai. We will see you at the next Open Learning webinar. And thank you all so much. Have a great evening.